Greetings, and welcome to an introduction to Linux. My name is Benjamin Martin, and these video tutorials are put together by the STEM program, which is a preparation for data-driven mathematical scientists for the workforce, and we are funded by the National Science Foundation. These intro videos are going to be covering the basics that we need to know for the Linux operating system, such as what is Linux, the terminal, basic file management, and then we'll get into things like Emacs and file permissions later on. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So what is Linux? Linux, just like Windows or Mac OS, is an operating system that was designed to be universal and multitasking. It runs off a master control program called the kernel, and the kernel provides services to execute and stop programs and just about any other low-level task that one would need to execute on a system. Uh, and why should we learn Linux? Well, as of June of 2013, 95.2% of the top 500 supercomputers run off of Linux, and that is an absolute huge number. It is the most popular operating system to execute heavy levels of computing, and that is extremely important for people going into things like big data. Uh, Things that we see in everyday life are also almost directly related to how Linux works. The Android operating system on a lot of smartphones nowadays is based almost entirely on Linux. So knowing Linux opens many doors for many individuals. The terminal is basically the gateway from the user to the computer systems and the kernel. Uh, Terminals have been around for decades. Terminals have been used uh, as input commands that go into a system. Basically, there was just a box with a monitor and a keyboard in somebody's office. It didn't have any type of operating system attached to it whatsoever. It was just used for inputting the command, it traveling through some wires into like the basement maybe with 1,000 pound uh, machines with operating systems on them that would then execute their command, would then be sent back to the terminal, and then the user would be able to see the output of the command. And that's basically what they do today, except they are much, uh, much smaller. They're basically just a window on the actual machine that we're using. That's why they're called terminal emulators now. They're not necessarily terminals, they're more of terminal emulators on the machine that we're using. But they still input and display commands and data to the system, and they then show us the output of those commands that we execute. Nearly everything we learn with Linux uh, will be using the terminal. So we definitely want to practice, and if you're not on a Linux machine, I advise you to download an emulator like VirtualBox, or if you don't like VirtualBox, you can simply search for other emulators. Most of them are free, and if you don't want to download an emulator, you can practice in the web browser by following this link. This emulator is very weak, but it should definitely be strong enough to run the low-level commands that we will be doing. So the types of commands for the terminal, there's many different types of commands, as from communication, comparison, file management, printing, programming, searching, shells, shell programming, storage, system status, text processing, and the main ones we'll be looking at is file management, the shell, and just file management and the shell. So we'll start with the shell. The shell is basically just the user interface of Unix. It is a default program in Linux that is designed to understand the user's commands. That's basically all it does. It's just designed to understand our commands, send them to the operating system then executes the commands and then sends us an output. And that is why it is also called the command line interpreter. It features a few things such as cursor movement. Unlike Word or Notepad or just about anything on the internet, you can't actually control the cursor with the mouse. You can't click and tell the cursor to go here. You have to control the cursor with the keyboard arrow keys. Now, the up and down arrow keys will actually tab through the history of your commands that you've inputted. So if I type a command, run it, and then want to go back to that command to either run it again or maybe go in and edit it, I can do that by using the up arrow key to go back in time. Now, the tab key is a very useful tool as well. Let's say that I want to make a new directory. The command to make a new directory is mkdir, and let's say I type the mkd, and I can hit the tab key and it will complete that partial command for me without me having to type the rest of the characters. So what is the purpose of the command line interface? The purpose is basically just to show us what we're working with, to show us our input, to show us our output, to take these commands and pass them to the operating system, and then they have the operating system run it and then send us the output so then we can see it. There are many different things we can accomplish with these commands in the command line interface, like setup variables. We can run initialization files, we can run startup commands, we can run programs, stop programs, etc. And inside the shell is also where we can start programming. Now, programming is what makes Linux so valuable. It's what makes it worth its weight in gold. It's what makes it the most commonly used operating system with supercomputers in the world. And they're called shell scripts, and they help us automate tasks. These tasks can be extremely simple. It can be extremely intricate. These tasks include simple things like encrypting files, or even checking disk space and sending us an email when it is close to full, and much more. Basically, there's an infinite number of things we can do with shell scripts and inside the shell. So the command line session is what we see, and it looks like this. Maybe not exactly like this. You can actually go into the settings and change colors. Yours may be white with black text, but the layout is typically always the same. So we have our command. The command is always typed next to the $sign, and then of course we have our results from the command. It is always outputted the next line under the command that you inputted. And then the prompt for a new command is always just a blinking cursor next to a $sign, waiting for us to type in a new command and send it to the operating system. So let's take a look at our first few commands. These are file management commands. They are very simple, but yet they are also extremely important to know and understand. The main one we want to take out of this first list is definitely going to be the CD, the first one there. That's change directory. We will get to what a directory is later. And the ones we want to take off of this one is definitely going to be ls. We can list the files or contents of the directories that we are in. mkdir will create a new directory. pwd will print a working directory. rm will remove a file. rmdir will remove an empty directory. And all of these are extremely important. Let's go ahead and move over to my emulator, and let's take a look at some of these commands. Now, I am using the JavaScript emulator in the web browser. If you're not using this one, what you see would most likely look very different, but the commands will all be the same, so it's not going to matter in the long run. So let's go ahead and start by looking at the default shell So if I type in a bunch of characters here, I can move my cursor over. You can see my cursor. And I can, what if I want to go in between the F and the A? I can click. I'm clicking. And it's not going to actually move the cursor over there. So as I said, you have to actually physically move the cursor with the arrow keys to move it over between the F and the A. And I can type other characters in between them, just like that. Okay. Now, I'm going to hit the enter key. I'm going to get an error because this isn't actually a command, but I'll hit the enter key, and it's going to say this wasn't found. So if this was a real life scenario and I got an error trying to type in a command, I can hit the up arrow key. So I'm going to hit the up arrow key here, and there we go. It's going to take me right back to the command I did have, and then I can change it to something that would then run properly, or I can run it again, so on and so forth. Now, let's take a look at the tab key. So mkdir is the command to make a new directory. So I'm going to type mkd, hit the tab key, and when I hit the tab key, it's going to give me these two, mkdir and mkdosfs. These are two commands that start with mkd, and it's just giving me the choice between the two. So let's go ahead and look at a few of the commands. Now, my current directory is in /var/root. So my current working directory is root. The root directory is not actually this root. This root is actually a subdirectory. The root directory is always going to be this first arrow key here, or sorry, first /. So let's see what files are in the current directory that I'm in. The way we do that is by typing in ls. You can see these commands from the slide that I showed you previously. ls, enter, and there are two other directories inside of the directory root, and it's hello.c and dos. Hello.c, I do believe, is actually a file, it's not a directory. So I can then move to one of these directories by doing cd. That stands for change directory. Change directory, and let's go into dos. So now I am inside of dos, and we can always go back. Shorthand for going back to the parent directory is just change directory, 2 dots, and we go back to where we were. Shorthand for going back all the way to the root directory. Let's go all the way back to the root directory. So we can do cd again, like we did earlier, and just type in the / or /, which is shorthand for the root directory. And boom. So now we went from /var/root to just a /. So let's see what directories are actually on branching from our root directory. So we do ls again, and there's all the directories that is inside of the root directory. So now we can go back to our var here, cd var. So now we're in var, and let's see what files are inside var. So we see root and we see tmp. Let's make a new directory. So let's do mkdir, that is the command to make a new directory. We hit the space bar once, and we give it a name. Let's just call it what our actual names are. So I'll call mine Ben. So make directory bin. So it run. Let's see if it's there. So we do ls to view all the directories inside of var. And there it is. So we went from just root and tmp. Now we have root, tmp, and bin. So let's go inside of my new bin folder. So it's cd bin. And let's see what directories are inside of bin. You might imagine what this would bring up. So we hit ls inside of bin, and nothing comes up. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here. I appreciate you guys watching. I will continue in part 2. Goodbye.